Most people never start a business not because they don't have money, but because they think they need everything first. They think they need a business permit, a DTI registration, an accountant, a website, an office, a logo, or a perfect plan before they can sell anything. And because of that mindset, they never even move. They're stuck in the idea that everything must be in place before they begin. But that's the biggest trap, because business doesn't start with perfection. It starts with action. The truth is, you don't need to start big. You just need to start small, with what you already have. You see, when I first began, I didn't have the right papers, I didn't have capital, I didn't even know how to build a brand. But I had something even more important. Awareness. Awareness that I didn't need to wait for permission to start. So instead of worrying about what I didn't have, I looked around and asked, what do I already have right now that I can use to start? And that simple question changed everything. Because business isn't built on what you lack, it's built on what you already have in your hands. You can't multiply something that doesn't exist. But if you have even one small thing, one skill, one product, one connection, you already have a seed. And seeds don't need permission to grow. They just need planting. So let me tell you how I started without all the so-called requirements that people usually worry about. How I turned what was already in my environment into a business. And how starting small eventually opened the door for everything else. The papers, the permits, and the success that came after. Because once you take the first step, the next steps reveal themselves naturally. When I first started my bread business, I honestly didn't have any idea what legal requirements even looked like. I wasn't thinking about DTI registration, business permits, or tax IDs. I didn't even know what the process was or where to start. I just wanted to sell bread. At that time, my goal wasn't to be perfectly legal. It was to test if people actually wanted what I was offering. I wanted to know if the idea had life, if it could breathe, if people would exchange their money for what I was selling. That was my only focus. But deep down, I was scared. What if I got caught? What if someone reported me? What if I was doing something wrong without realizing it? Those what ifs are powerful. They can freeze you before you even take your first step. And that's what I realized. Fear is what keeps most people broke. Not the lack of money, not the lack of opportunity, but the fear of starting imperfectly. Because here's the truth. The market doesn't care about your permit. The market cares about your product. When someone buys bread from you, they're not thinking, is this person registered with the local government? They're thinking, is this bread soft? Is it delicious? Is it worth my money? That's what matters. And that's when it clicked for me. Starting small is not just about being practical. It's about being brave. I remember those early days vividly. I would wake up before sunrise to check on the bread deliveries. I'd load the trays into the tricycle, check each piece like it was gold, and then deliver them to Sari Sari stores or neighbors who already trusted us. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't big. But it was real. Sometimes I'd look at big businesses and feel small. They had uniforms, systems, and employees. I had plastic bags and handwritten notes. But that's where I learned one of the most important truths about entrepreneurship. Every big business started small. Amazon started in a garage. Apple started on a wooden desk. Even the biggest brands in the world started with an idea, not a permit. And if you really think about it, even in the Bible, growth never starts complete. It starts as a seed. The seed doesn't have fruit yet. It doesn't have branches. It doesn't have approval from anyone. It just grows quietly, consistently in the soil it's planted in. That's what I did. I planted my seed in the soil I already had. At first, it was just me helping my family's small bread delivery. My parents had been doing it even before I was born. For years, it was just normal. I never saw it as a business. I took it for granted because it was always there. I thought that's just what my parents do. But one day, something shifted in me. I started to see it differently. It wasn't just bread anymore. It was opportunity. It wasn't just delivery, it was distribution. It wasn't just selling, it was serving. I didn't start something new. I simply became aware of what was already in front of me. That's what awareness does. It changes how you see things. When your awareness expands, your world expands. Most people are surrounded by opportunities, but never see them because they're too focused on what they don't have. They're waiting for the right moment, the perfect idea, or the big capital to begin. But life doesn't work that way. I remember one time I told a friend about my plan. I said, I'm just going to start selling bread online. He looked at me like I was crazy. Online? Who buys bread online? He laughed. But that's the thing. When you're ahead of awareness, people will think you're crazy until it works. I started posting our bread on social media. I didn't have a logo yet. I didn't even have nice photos. Just honest pictures and captions like freshly baked today or available for delivery. And you know what happened? People started buying. Not because of the logo, not because of the packaging, but because they trusted the person behind it. That's when I realized business is not about the papers, it's about the person. The government didn't teach me how to sell. The market did. And that's where I learned the most valuable lessons. You learn faster when you're moving. You improve faster when you're doing. You grow faster when you're serving. The requirements, the systems, the structure, they all come later. But none of them will matter if you never take the first step. Eventually, as my small business started growing, I started learning about the formal side. I began registering the business, filing for permits, and understanding taxes. But it didn't overwhelm me anymore because now I had a reason to do it. I wasn't guessing. I was growing. And here's the key lesson I learned through it all. You don't wait for your business to be ready before you start. You start so your business becomes ready. Too many people want to look official before they become effective. But effectiveness comes first. I can tell you this from experience. Perfection is just fear in disguise. It makes you feel productive while keeping you stuck. It's like saying you'll go to the gym once you get fit. You'll start saving once you have more money. You'll start selling once you have a permit. It's backwards. The truth is, God blesses movement. He multiplies action, not excuses. Even in the Bible, the people who were blessed weren't the ones who waited. They were the ones who moved in faith. I remember praying once, asking God for a big opportunity. But He didn't give me something new. He just opened my eyes to what was already around me. The bread business, the one I used to ignore. And it made me realize something profound. Sometimes the blessing is already there. You just don't recognize it because it looks ordinary. If I had waited until I had everything perfect, I'd still be waiting today. Now that I look back, I'm grateful I started small and imperfect, because that season of uncertainty trained me. It taught me discipline. It taught me courage. It taught me humility. And more importantly, it taught me that business is not just about selling a product. It's about becoming a person who can handle the growth that comes after. You can have all the permits, all the plans, all the legal papers, but if you don't have the perseverance to start and the faith to continue, those documents won't make you successful. Starting small allowed me to build momentum. And momentum is the one thing no paper can give you. So if you're listening to this and you've been stuck because you think you're not ready, this is your sign. Start where you are. Use what you have. Learn as you go. The permits can come later. The logo can come later. The structure can come later. But the opportunity you have today, that won't wait forever. Don't let fear disguise itself as preparation, because sometimes the need to be ready is really the fear of failure pretending to be wisdom. You're not supposed to be ready. You're supposed to begin, because once you begin, you'll discover that everything you thought you needed to start was already within you. When I first started my bread business, I didn't think of it as testing. I just wanted to sell and see what would happen. But now that I look back, that's exactly what it was, a test. The first stage of any business is not building a corporation, it's proving an idea works. That's what I call principle number 1, test before you register. Most people make the mistake of thinking they need everything in place before starting. The logo, the permit, the store sign, the capital. They want to look official before they even know if their idea is working. The truth is, business is like planting a seed. You don't build the fence before you see if the seed can grow. When you start small, you're not committing to forever. You're just observing. You're testing your market, your product, and yourself. You're learning what people like, how they respond, what they're willing to pay for. You're testing demand, not defending a dream. In my case, I started with what I had: bread, a few contacts, and the courage to post online. That was my experiment. I didn't overthink it. I didn't even have a name for the business yet. I was simply moving. Then something happened. People started to buy. I remember the feeling when I got my first online order. It wasn't even a big sale, but it meant something far more important: validation. That single moment told me that my product wasn't just an idea in my head. It was real to someone else. That's when I knew. It's time to make it official. And that's the right order. Validate, then register. When I saw consistent sales coming in, that's when I began researching permits, taxes, and the formal side of business. Because by that point, I already had something alive, something worth protecting and growing. Too many people do it backward. They spend weeks, even months, filing papers, designing logos, paying for legal fees, all for a business that hasn't proven it can survive its first sale. Then, when it doesn't work, they end up frustrated thinking, maybe business isn't for me. But it's not that business failed, it's that they skipped the test. Think about it. You don't buy all the gym equipment before trying a workout routine. You go to the gym, see what works for you, and then decide what's worth investing in. The same goes for business. Testing first gives you data. It gives you confidence. It shows you what to fix, what to improve, what to stop doing. You can only discover these things when you're actually in motion. And testing doesn't mean you're being careless. It means you're being practical. When I was starting, I had people warning me, what if you get penalized for not having a business permit? Or what if your business gets closed down? Those were valid concerns. But here's the thing. How can you close something that hasn't even opened yet? I wasn't running a corporation. I was running an experiment. And once the experiment worked, then it became a business. That's when I started to see the importance of structure, not before, but after. The legal papers, the systems, the branding, they're all tools for something that's already alive. They don't create success, they support it. The truth is, the world doesn't reward those who wait to be perfect. It rewards those who dare to start, even if it's messy. Every successful entrepreneur I've met didn't start with all the answers. They started with curiosity and commitment. The goal of the test is simple: to see if your idea can create value. If people pay for it, then it's worth protecting. So if you're listening to this right now and you're worried about the requirements, remember this: start with what you can do, not what you can't. Don't be paralyzed by what's missing. Focus on what's possible, because every test is a preparation for something bigger. The test is not meant to scare you, it's meant to prepare you for the next level. Once you prove that your idea works, then everything else, permits, branding, taxes, systems, will make sense. You'll understand why you're doing it, instead of just following a checklist. That's how you grow naturally. You start small, validate the idea, and let the next step reveal itself. That's how real entrepreneurs move. They don't chase perfection, they chase proof. When I first started, I honestly didn't even know what taxes were supposed to look like for a small business. I wasn't avoiding them, I just didn't understand them. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. You hear words like BIR, SEC, DTI, and it sounds intimidating, like an exam you haven't studied for. But here's what I learned. You don't have to know everything before you start. You just have to start, and the lessons will find you when they matter. I call this principle number 2, learn the rules along the way. When I began selling bread, all I wanted to do was serve customers. I didn't think about paperwork or government regulations. But as the business grew, I started getting questions. Do you have a permit? Are you registered? And instead of panicking, I took it as a sign that I was leveling up. Growth always introduces you to new responsibilities. That's the natural order. You don't learn how to pay business taxes when you're still earning your first 100 pesos. You learn it when it becomes relevant, when the blessings start multiplying, and you have to manage them properly. It's like the verse that says, God doesn't give you all the steps at once. He gives you the next step when you take the first one. That's how faith works. That's how business works too. In the beginning, I didn't even know what the difference was between a DTI and an SEC registration. But when I needed to open a business bank account, I discovered I couldn't without proper papers. That's when I understood why those things exist. It wasn't about bureaucracy, it was about structure. And that structure gave me access to more opportunities. The learning came naturally because it was driven by purpose, not pressure. If I had tried to learn everything before starting, I would have been stuck in analysis paralysis. I would have wasted months researching instead of doing. I would have stayed afraid of rules that were never meant to stop me. They were meant to guide me when the time came. So instead of stressing about what I didn't know, I focused on what I could do. I learned just in time, not all at once. When the business grew, I learned about taxation. When I wanted to supply bigger stores, I learned about compliance. When I needed branding protection, I learned about trademarks. Every step revealed its own lesson. It reminded me of driving at night. You don't need to see the entire highway to get to your destination. You only need to see the next few meters ahead, and as you move, more of the road reveals itself. That's how faith and entrepreneurship go hand in hand. If you're listening to this, and you haven't started because you don't know how to register yet, or how to compute taxes, don't let that stop you. You'll learn it when it's time. What matters now is that you begin. Because clarity doesn't come before action. Clarity comes from action. When I finally understood this, business became less scary. I realized that learning on the way isn't a sign of unpreparedness. It's a sign of growth. You learn because you're moving, not because you've memorized all the rules. And the beautiful thing is, every time you take a step forward, God brings the right person, the right resource, or the right experience to teach you the next thing. That's how He builds entrepreneurs, not by giving us a full manual, but by letting us discover the path through obedience. So the lesson is simple. Don't wait to understand everything before you begin. Start small, move faithfully, and trust that the knowledge will meet you when you need it. Because that's how both faith and business grow. One revelation, one lesson, one step at a time. When I look back, I realize most people never fail at business because of a bad idea. They fail because they never even start. And one of the biggest reasons they never start is that they confuse business with bureaucracy. They think entrepreneurship means paperwork, licenses, and approvals before they ever talk to a single customer. But here's the truth. Business isn't about paperwork. It's about service. When I started, I didn't have a DTI certificate framed on my wall. What I had was bread and people who were hungry for it. That was all I needed to begin. I wasn't serving a system, I was serving a need. And that's what real entrepreneurship is. It's not about waiting for the perfect document, it's about showing up for people with what you already have. If you study the greats, none of them started with everything figured out. They started by solving a problem. Someone needed something. They showed up to meet that need. That's the foundation of business. You don't need a permit to serve people. You don't need an office to add value. You don't need a business card to make a difference. What you need is heart, consistency, and courage. People often ask me, what's the first thing I should do before starting my business? And I always say, find someone to help. Because money follows service. The moment you focus on helping others, opportunities start to multiply. But if you're focused on paperwork more than people, you'll get stuck building a company that looks official but has no heartbeat. That's why so many potential entrepreneurs never leave the starting line. They're obsessed with getting everything perfect before taking the first step. But perfection is just procrastination in disguise. You keep telling yourself, once I register my business, I'll start. Once I get my logo, I'll launch. Once I learn marketing, I'll sell. And before you know it, years pass, and the idea that could have changed your life dies in your notebook. Let me tell you something I learned the hard way. It's better to start imperfectly than to stay perfect in your head. I didn't start my business because I was ready. I started because I couldn't afford to wait anymore. I had a product, I had people who wanted it, and I had a purpose that was bigger than my fear. And the moment I shifted my focus from rules to results, everything changed. When you serve with excellence, the rest follows naturally. The papers, the permits, the legalities, they all make sense after the impact begins. Think about this from a biblical view. When Jesus multiplied the bread, he didn't wait for permission from the Pharisees. He saw people hungry, and he acted. Service always comes before structure. That's how faith works too. You act in obedience, not in overthinking. I realized that my role as an entrepreneur wasn't to impress the system, it was to impact lives. The people buying from me didn't care about my business registration number. They cared that the bread they bought was fresh, that it fed their families, and that I showed up every day. That's the real business: consistency, care, and connection. If you can master those three, the paperwork will eventually chase you, not the other way around. There's something liberating about starting before you're qualified. It trains your heart to focus on the mission, not the manual. And it builds momentum. Because once you see that you can help people and they value what you do, you gain the confidence to keep growing. And that's when scaling becomes possible. So, if you're listening to this and thinking, I'll start my business once I fix everything first, I want to challenge you to flip that mindset. You don't need to fix everything before you start. Starting is how you fix it. It's through movement that clarity comes. It's through service that systems find their place. And as you keep serving, you'll begin to notice something powerful. The very things you were worried about, permits, paperwork, rules, begin to align effortlessly. Because when you put service first, structure naturally follows purpose. So here's what I'll leave you with today. Don't wait to be perfect to serve. Serve now. Start small. Do what you can with what you have. Because business isn't about being ready, it's about being willing. And once you focus on service, you'll realize that the things you thought were holding you back were never the real obstacle. The only thing standing between you and your success was waiting for permission that you never needed in the first place. When I think about how I started, with no permits, no official plan, and honestly, no idea what I was doing, I realized something deeply spiritual was happening. It wasn't just business. It was obedience. I was being trained to trust that what I had was already enough. Even Jesus didn't begin his ministry with a permit. He didn't have a title, a license, or government recognition. He started with what he had: the word, the message, and faith that it was meant to multiply. That's the same spiritual principle behind every act of creation and business. Start with what you have, and let faith handle what you don't. If you think about it, every miracle began with something ordinary. The water turned into wine, the 5 loaves and 2 fish multiplied, the widow's oil that never ran out. None of those stories started with perfection or plenty. They started with awareness, a realization that what's already in your hand is enough for God to use. I learned that lesson deeply in my own journey. When I finally stopped saying I don't have enough and started saying what can I do with what I already have, everything began to change. Because the truth is, lack is not a financial condition. It's a spiritual perception. It's blindness to abundance. When you start focusing on what's missing, your energy moves towards scarcity. But when you shift to gratitude and awareness, suddenly doors open that you didn't even know existed. That's why faith is so powerful. It opens your eyes to see what's been there all along. And here's something I realized. Business is spiritual. When you sell, serve, and create, you are participating in God's original command to be fruitful and multiply. That's why entrepreneurship done with the right heart is a form of worship. It's not greed, it's stewardship. So if you have something valuable, your skills, your voice, your product, your idea, you already have everything you need to begin. You don't need permission to use your gift. You don't need all the steps figured out. The rest will follow when you move in faith. When I finally embraced that truth, I stopped overthinking and started walking. And every time I obeyed what I felt led to do, something new unfolded. A new client, a new connection, a new opportunity. That's how divine timing works. You won't see the whole staircase until you take the first step. It's like God saying, use what's in your hand and I'll bless what's in your reach. That's the same energy that turns an idea into income, a seed into a harvest. You don't wait for everything to be perfect. You start, and in the starting, perfection begins to take shape. So if you're listening right now, still thinking you need more capital, more knowledge, or more approval to start your business, hear this: you already have enough. The moment you act in obedience with what's in your hand, heaven partners with you to multiply it. Faith without action is just wishful thinking. But faith expressed through small, consistent steps, that's what activates miracles in business and in life. Start with what you have, do what you can, and trust that as you move, the unseen will start moving with you. Because the truth is, God never asked you to be ready. He asked you to be willing. So, what do you really need to start a business? You don't need a permit, a perfect plan, or $1,000,000 in the bank. What you truly need is courage, the willingness to move before you're ready, the faith that progress always comes before permission. Because if you wait for the perfect time, you'll be waiting forever. When I look back, nothing about my beginning looked impressive. No big launch, no investors, no business degree. It was just me, a few trays of bread, and a decision to try. That's where everything began. Not with perfection, but participation. And that's what I want to remind you of today. Success doesn't come to the person who plans the most. It comes to the one who moves first. Most people are stuck not because they don't know what to do, but because they're afraid to do it wrong. They want certainty before commitment, but that's not how faith or business works. You don't get certainty until you step forward. The clarity you're praying for only comes in motion. The answers appear when you move. When you start with what you have, something powerful happens. Your environment begins to respond. People notice. Opportunities show up. Connections start forming. Why? Because faith in action creates attraction. It's like sending a signal to the universe and to God that you're serious about your calling. So instead of overthinking, just start selling, start offering, start serving. Maybe your sale comes from your neighbor. Maybe your first customer is a friend. That's fine. Every empire started with one believer and one transaction. The key is to participate, to plant your seed, even if the soil looks small. The truth is, you'll learn more in 1 month of doing than in 1 year of planning. You'll figure out what works, what doesn't, and how to adapt. And that learning, that experience, is something no business permit can ever give you. Remember, God doesn't bless the perfect plan. He blesses the obedient step. You take one, and He shows you the next. That's how faith builds momentum. So here's my challenge to you. Stop waiting for everything to be ready. You don't need a sign. You need a start. You already have something in your hands right now that can grow if you plant it. A skill, a product, an idea, a story, whatever it is, put it to work. Because at the end of the day, the people who win in business aren't the ones who waited for approval. They're the ones who decided to act. You have everything you need to begin. Don't let fear disguise itself as logic. Don't let waiting look like wisdom. Move. Build. Serve. Learn. Repeat. Start small. Stay faithful. And trust that the small you begin with today will multiply in ways you can't yet imagine. Because progress doesn't come from perfection. It comes from participation. Now, imagine if you actually did it. Not tomorrow, not next year, but today. What would happen if you decided that your small step is already big enough for God to use?